in the book of John, chapter 17. John chapter 17. Now, just so you are aware, the whole chapter, pretty much, is a recorded prayer of Jesus. The longest prayer we have recorded by Jesus himself. He prays about a number of things, mostly praying for his apostles. And then, of course, through the trickle effect, we also get to reap the benefits of this prayer. He prays for all of us as well. One of the main things he prays for is unity. In this prayer, which also happens to be the last thing we have on record before chapter 18. Chapter 18 is when the soldiers approached Jesus for the purpose of arresting him to be crucified. And this is the last thing that we have on record of him saying this prayer right here. John happened to record many of the words, and I make reference to this regularly just because to me it's significant that John was able to record so much of what Jesus said, so much of the things that were the last things while he was in the flesh that he was going to say to his disciples. And you know, even though Jesus was God in the flesh, he also was human and he was experiencing intense emotion. So there's a lot of emotional energy in this text also. But today, really is just one verse that I want to focus on right now. It's John chapter 17, verse 16. Now, he's praying for his disciples. And of course, like I said, through that trickle effect, as the gospel has been to you, your children, and to all that are afar off, which is what Peter told the Jews on the day of Pentecost. We also are recipients of this grace and this prayer, and also of the truths that are within this text. John 17, verse 16, Jesus makes the statement, "They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world." So that right there probably opens up a lot of questions and a lot of things for us to meditate upon, think about, and wonder about whenever we are considering our position in the world. The world is the place in which we exist, of course. It is a physical place, but there's also a spiritual meaning behind the words here. The world, in a lot of ways, is a reference just to mankind in general. The world is the place that Jesus was sent to, and as one of the most quoted verses in the Bible says, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." Now there is different flavors of the use of the word world. We're going to explore another way, another place that we can consider the place for which we are and our position in this existence, in this world. We're going to go now. I'm going to take you to the other writing of John. It's going to be the first epistle of John, and we're going to see some of the things that John had to write about the world. So go with me to 1 John chapter 5. In 1 John, this whole epistle is it has a neat style that John wrote. He was explaining so many things with such simplicity and so many very spiritual and sometimes even hard to be understood, especially if you isolate verses. You have to take a look at the panoramic view of the text. You got to study the whole thing to understand much of it. But now we're going to keep it pretty simple this morning. We're going to be in chapter 5, 1 John chapter 5, and we're going to be reading verses 1 through 4. If you would read that with me. 1 John 5, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Whosoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loves him that begat loves him also that is begotten of him. Verse 2, by this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. Now, verse 4, for whatsoever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. We got a lot of things mentioned right here in this text. We have believing, we have confession, we have love, we have obedience, obeying the commandments of God. Verse 3, I like how John points out that the commandments were not intended to be burdensome or difficult for us. However impossible it is to keep them all perfectly. But the idea isn't to bring us burden. The idea is to enrich our lives. The idea is to bring us blessing. Then verse 4 is where we have this idea of a world, of the world brought into the picture in our text. 1 John chapter 5, verse 4, he says, for whatsoever is born of God overcomes the world. Now we have another slightly different flavor of talking about the world. So we talked about it in the text in Jesus' prayer. We were able to take notice of the fact that to be a disciple of Christ means to be in the world, but not of the world. In the prayer, Jesus even says, I'm not praying to remove them from the world. So there's a challenge. There's something that we have to consider here, that we are in the world. I mean, that's pretty easy to prove. Now, I don't really need any hardcore evidence because it's right here. Here we are. We're in the world right now. We're all kind of stuck here together for now. That's just the way it is. It's the way it's got to be. So we're in the world. Jesus says, I'm not trying to get them out of the world right now. That's not my intent. The idea isn't to isolate Christians, put them off on an island somewhere so that they can do nothing but pray. That's not the purpose. That's not what we want. You ever hear the saying, Christians are like manure? When it's all piled up together, it stinks. But when you spread it, stuff starts to grow. Right? So the idea isn't to isolate us. And, it's okay in brief moments of time. Like right now, we're all together. But there's a sweet smell. If we hang out here too long, it's going to start to get rancid, okay? So in about 45 minutes, I'll let you go. And God expects you to go out and start spreading the good word. That's what we need, But we have to get out in the world. We can't just stay put. We also can't be of the world either. Not to be of the world. In fact, there's an even stronger word that's used here in chapter 5, verse 4. Jesus was a bit passive when he says that we're not of the world. A very true statement, but more passive. When John recorded this epistle, 1 John, he says, whosoever is born of God overcomes it, overcomes the world. And that makes us stop and wonder and think, now what does it mean now to overcome the world? And then he points out what our victory is. Our victory over the world, our faith. So by faith, we can have victory. By faith, we can overcome. We are not left in the dark as far as the lesson is concerned. We will now consider in a bit more detail what it is to overcome the world, or what the world is. What is it exactly that we as Christians are trying to overcome? What is our struggle? What is this entity or element or spirit even? We're told to try or to test the spirits, also in this first epistle of John in chapter 4. What is it that we are trying to overcome? Because if you can identify your enemy, it's easier to take him out. Some of us are really interested in war history, war documentaries, and all this. Whenever I get sick, or to the point that I'm just laying there and I'm just horizontal for like a good solid week, Whenever that happens to me, I just like to pull out good old Civil War, World War II documentaries, and I sit there, and at least my brain can absorb a little bit of it. But I also like to read war strategy, war tactics, and there's a guy named Sun Tzu who was, I don't know, like 1,000 years ago or something like that. And he simply wrote in The Art of War to know yourself and know your enemy. Very important to be able to pinpoint the enemy. In the 2 Corinthians epistle, the Apostle Paul wrote, we are not ignorant of his devices, which is talking about Satan. That's why we study our enemy, study what part of the world that we are to be overcoming so that we can conquer it, so that we know. I'm going to take you now back to chapter 2 of the same epistle. 1 John chapter 2. You can see that John has already addressed what the world is as far as what he means when he says we must overcome it. What is to be overcome? What is to be conquered? What we are to have victory over. 1 John chapter 2. I want you to read with me verses 15 through 17. This is all technical stuff. This is technical information. These are just basic truths to help us to understand who we are and what the world is around us, what our challenge is. So 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Read with me. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away, and the lust thereof. He that does the will of the Father abides forever. Now, to go through the details of this, to go through the details of what the world is a worthy pursuit. Understand lust. You go and take a look at the lust of the flesh in Galatians 5. You can understand that a lot of the things that have been created and messed up, a lot of the things that have been twisted in the world as far as the flesh is concerned, adultery, sexual immorality, drunkenness, division, wrath, hatred, those kind of things. Those are the kind of things that we often make excuse for, and then we will practice and we'll get caught in, or we will allow to trickle into our lives. And that's the way the world is right now. It trickles in. I know there's people here that are familiar, at least, with things like maintenance. And if you aren't an expert on maintenance, or you're not good at maintenance and figuring out how to take care of things, you're at least a renter or a homeowner. You live somewhere, and when water is leaking, when it first happens, it ain't so bad. It's just a nuisance. When the water is leaking out of, just out onto the bathroom floor just a little bit, pish posh. What a nuisance it is at first. And it's just, you just dry it up a little bit here, a little bit there. But the kids don't dry it up. You don't think about it. They don't care. They don't look at the long-term effects. They don't look at the water trickling and what it will do over time. Thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of damage just one little water trickle will do. Just like that billboard that you pass by on your way to work all the time. It's got a picture that plants a seed every time you open up that phone, and that ad is right there showing you this is what the world is like, and it's wonderful, but it's not. It's a trickle, it's a water that just is trickling into your soul, and it is the lust of the flesh. It's the lust of the eyes. It's the pride of life. It's the thing that if we leave it unchecked, will do not thousands of dollars worth of damage, because that really stinks. Whenever you have thousands of dollars that you have to pay, you have to write that check. Oh, it stings. Oh, mercy, it stings. Well, kids, there goes our Disneyland trip for the year, you know? Like it hurts and it stings. But the sting that we're talking about, the sting of sin, is the sting of death, eternal death. It's so much worse. It's so much harder. It's so much more of a contaminant in our lives. We're told not to love it, not to allow it to distract us, not to allow it to penetrate. I think in the grand scheme of all things, the easiest and the most simple way to talk about the world is it is indeed a pressure of distraction. We're told to seek those things which are above. Seek things that are heavenly. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Don't put treasure in this life. Don't store up things in this life. Even clothes, that's where the moth hang out and start eating the holes through it. It's all corruptible. It's all going to be destroyed. In this text, what we're reading right now, it says, and the world passes away and the lust thereof. One day it's all going to be obliterated. And you're not going to be thinking about it. You're not going to be concerned about what's happening down here. It's so tempting to think about what's going on down here. And that's why I meant when I used the word pressure, because it's always there. The world is always here. It's always just pecking at you. It's always trying to get you to look away from Jesus. It's always trying to keep you from doing the right thing. It's always trying to get you to think about the here and the now, what's happening right now, and the pleasure of this moment. And he says, don't worry about this stuff down here. It's a pressure. And the pressure sometimes seems to be unbearable. Sometimes that pressure is in the form of pain, not pleasure. Pleasure, some of us got to a point where it's like, well, pleasure, I have learned to take pleasure in not having pleasure. We learn to discipline ourselves. We learn to work hard and all those kinds of things. But then sometimes pain is that pressure to get you to be so worn out, take you down to your knees. You ever hear somebody say the words, I'm tired of being strong. Tired of being strong. Now, I understand the sentiment behind that statement. I understand. But we can't afford to be tired of being strong. We can't afford to allow pain to take us down to our knees. That's why so much of the New Testament was written. In Hebrews, it says, lift up the knees and lift up the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. It is a temptation to allow the pressure of the world to conquer us. And that's one of the reasons why we read the words of John when he says it's something that must be overcome. It's something that we have to conquer. It's something that we have to have victory over. The world, the pressure thereof. But right now, there is one little piece that I want to bring to your attention today. One flavor of the world. And that's the way the world is, right? Especially the world we live in right now. There's anything you want, any flavor you want, any kind of entertainment you want, anything you want, you can have it. You have access to it. I've heard this good old stories about the free channels of TV. There was only 3 channels, and there was only one TV in the house. That's not the world I grew up in. My brother had a TV in his room. I didn't have a TV in my room, but I had a CD player. I listened to Elvis and Michael Jackson. But that was the world I grew up in. But I remember back in the day, well, I don't remember. I don't know why I said that. I don't remember back in the day. I've heard stories about back in the day. And when there was only 3 channels and when the TV was over, it was just like a screen, it was done, it was gone. That's not the world we live in right now. You can have any flavor you want. Junior can be in his room doing whatever he wants. Little Sally can be in her room doing whatever she wants. Even the husband and wife can be in separate rooms. No wonder family is so divided nowadays. No wonder. But that's the world we're going up in. So I want to talk to you about another flavor. A flavor of worldliness that will conquer you if you aren't aware of it. It's in 1 John. We're going to take a look at chapter 1. Chapter 1. Verse 6. Verse 6. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. Now we're reading the words of John the Beloved. We're reading his words. We're reading from his vast experience. And not just from his vast experience, but also from what he has heard, what he has seen with his own hands. He actually starts it off that way. In chapter 1, verse 1, that which was from the beginning, that which we have heard, that which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled the word of life. And he's talking about Jesus. He saw him with his own eyes. He touched him with his own hands. In fact, in the book of John, the gospel, it talks about how he leaned in the bosom of Jesus. Other versions say different things. I got the good old-fashioned King James, the authorized version, right? No, but I use the King James, and it says in John that that John, or the disciple who leaned on Jesus' bosom. And I don't know why the other versions change it. And I've looked at the Greek in the past. I can't remember what the Greek words were. But I always thought that was so neat, such a neat idea. Because, I'm sorry, right here, right now, there's not a dude in this room that I want to lean on his chest. Period. There's not a dude in here that I want to do that. Even my own father, if he said, "Come here, son, come here," I wouldn't be like, "Oh," like with my dad. I'd be like, "Dad," shake hands. And that's just me, no big deal. But if Jesus is here, I would melt. I would melt into his bosom. I would just, I don't know, I would probably cry. I'd be like, Jesus. And I would just melt into his bosom. And that's the experience that John is sharing. It says he leaned on his bosom, and he is sharing from his vast experience what he got to see. And he's saying right here in verse 6, it is very tempting to say we have fellowship with the Father and walk in darkness at the same time. That's a lie. We can't allow ourselves to believe that lie. It's right now in the text, and the way I'm looking at it right now, the way we're reading it right now, is it's about who you have fellowship with. Take a look at verse 3. 1 John 3, chapter 1, verse 3, that which we have seen and heard, he repeats it. He said that in verse 1. Declare we unto you. Now, keep reading with me. That you also may have fellowship with us. Now, that sounds pretty sweet, that right there. You just stop right there. To have fellowship with the apostles, I love the way Jesus described the kingdom of heaven in Matthew. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a table, and many from the east and many from the west will come and sit at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the point of that lesson is he was talking about how the Jews, they were for some reason the ones who walked away from that table, but it was the outsiders, the Gentiles, who came to that table. There's another place in Ephesians where it says that he has made us to be able to sit together with Jesus in the heavenly places. That's a present tense word, to sit together in heavenly places. That's present tense. That means you don't have to wait to sit with Jesus. You can be in his presence right now. You can have fellowship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob right now. You can have fellowship with the Apostle Paul. You can have fellowship with John the Beloved. You can have fellowship with Peter right now. You can even hear his stories. You can hear his stories. He'll sit down with you and say, Dave, I denied him 3 times, and it hurt, you know. But as sweet as that sounds, to be able to hang out with flesh and blood, or to be able to hang out with other people who have fellowship. Notice what John emphasizes. And truly, you notice that, and truly, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. That's where our fellowship is to be. Now, it is wonderful. Maybe behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Wonderful. But the presence and the fellowship is to be in heaven. In other words, and you'll see where I'm taking it. You'll see what's going on. Our conduct, our life, our walk, our fellowship is to be in heaven. I mean, we're living in a way as if our thoughts, our minds. I mean, we're almost living in a dream world. What's wrong with that Christian over there? Well, he's always talking about this place called heaven. Why is he so pleasant? Because he's in heaven in his mind right now. Because he's in fellowship with the Father. But if you're walking with the Father, you cannot walk in darkness. You must not walk in darkness. You can't be walking around down here. You got to be walking around up there. And we just read that in verse 6. Well, let's continue reading. Verse 7. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light. Again, notice the present tense of the activity. The present tense. You know, even sitting is an activity. We talked about that. Sitting together in heavenly places with Jesus. That's a present tense. We walk in the light as he is in the light. That means we're walking with Jesus where he is. In the light. In heaven. In the heavenly places. And our treasure is up there. What does that mean? Where does that take us? First of all, be not deceived. Be not deceived, because there is a way to walk, which is a lie. Walk in darkness. And that, of course, is to walk in the world, to be stuck down here. We are actually told not to be stuck down here. For the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. But how do we conquer it? What is all this? How does it unfold? Well, I'm going to use walk as a metaphor with you today. Walk. To walk in the light. Be in the light. To walk in fellowship. Walking isn't just about physical walking. In fact, that's far from the lesson. It's becoming hard for many of our people to walk physically. They still walk. They're still walking. Walking obviously wasn't a way to talk about being on your 2 feet. So it must be something else. It must be something else. But what is it? And when we walk, we're doing things. We're active. We're moving. And I stop when I think about it. Man, I just got to do this. I got to think about walking and define it. What I believe the scriptures is telling us it is to be. I believe it's telling us how to live. When you walk with Christ, you're living with Christ. So then what activity, what living are we partaking in then? What kind of living is then happening that is going to produce something that's going to bring us in a place where we are living with Jesus? I start thinking about life. And I start thinking about this walking metaphor. And then I start to recall the writings of King David. And I noticed something about the way he wrote. And I'm going to share a couple of them. One of them, actually, we don't know that he wrote a lot of the Psalms. But I started to notice kind of an interesting pattern. And I welcome you, I invite you to go home, get out your old concordance, get Google out of here, get an old-fashioned concordance. Just use that. Google will take you in different directions and it'll get you distracted and all this. Get Google out of here. Just get that good old-fashioned, it's like 20 pounds. You hold it in your hand. It's a concordance. Get it out and look up the word dwell and dwelling place and habitation. And you will find places in the word, in the scriptures, where we're told about living with Jesus and living and acting as if we're in his presence. Now, this is so easy because just like I was talking about when you're, when my dad's in the room, I act a certain way. I'm telling you, I act a certain way because, my posture is way better when my dad's in the room. It just is. But what about when Jesus walks in the room? What about when Jesus walks in the room? How are you walking? Proverbs chapter 10 tells us that a man who walks uprightly walks surely. Somebody who is sure in the presence of Jesus. And David said, as he was talking about walking, you remember, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. We got movement. We got living going on here, living in lushness and being taken care of. We got living with all your needs being met. But then he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. You see the simplicity here? He says, for thou art with me. That means he's walking with him. That means he's walking with the shepherd. That means he's following the shepherd. It's so simple. There's no problems here. I know you understand it intellectually, but but when he walks in the room, do you walk out of the room? You see what's going on here? You see what's going on? You can't walk in darkness and be in the room with him. Man, it's so easy. And you're safe with him. But you got to walk with him. And then he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He's taking care of us. Jesus prepares a table. We're walking with him, living with him. There's that table again, sitting at the table with Jesus and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see all the connections? You see how it all just, it's woven together perfectly? Then he says, you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows, unless you walk out of the room. And you ain't with Jesus anymore. When you stay with him, your cup is always overflowing. So much so that everyone else can feel it. Everyone else can feel that flowing of blessing and love and kindness and all those wonderful things. Get that flesh, lust of the flesh out of here, because it's not bringing unity. It's not bringing good. I always had to stop and wonder at the end of the song. The tabernacle was the temporary temple of the Lord, right? The tabernacle was a temporary, it was like a tent that would just travel from here to there. David wanted so bad to build a temple that was to be this majestic, beautiful, permanent structure for God, Jehovah, to be able to be. But that temple hadn't been built yet. So why would David say then at the end of Psalm 23, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What house is he talking about? What house is he referring to? Same house that you can live in. The same house that you can walk in. With the same goodness and mercy that will follow you all the days of your life. And you can be even more intrigued by the statements of being able to walk with him and dwell with him. He, Psalm 91, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High abides under the shadow of the Almighty. Later on, it says that he will watch over you so that you won't dash your foot against the stone. And that is how you walk. When you walk like that, you don't dash your foot on that stone. When you walk with him, that lust gets behind you. Get behind me, Satan, you say. It doesn't even bother you anymore. It doesn't faze you anymore. But then every now and then it does. Then he picks you up and he walks with you. But you stay in his presence. And you walk in that light, but you can't walk in darkness. When he comes into the room, you stay in the room with him. You don't walk out of the room. How often do you purposefully and intentionally walk away from him? That's when the trouble starts. That's when your faith starts to waver. Do this. You have to stay with him. It's so simple. We are the ones who complicate it. We're the ones who messing it up. Now we take this full circle back to John chapter 16, because we're right in that area where Jesus was getting ready to be betrayed. And we read that prayer. They are in the world, but not of the world. I'm not taking them out of the world, because we already established that fact. You're stuck down here for a while until he calls you back up. I was listening to a little video. I like to watch some of this kind of stuff. The oldest man in America, he's passed since, but he was the oldest World War II veteran. And he said, by the way, he was a member of the Church of Christ in Austin, Texas. But there you go. But anyway, he just listened to the way he talks, and he said, I don't know. I was in that war. And he said, if it's your time, that bull's gonna hit you. But if it's not your time, it's going over your head. Now, what's his philosophy? That's what he said. That's why I'm alive. He said, man's gonna kill you. God's keeping you alive. So, I can't remember why I said that. But I'm back in John chapter 16. Notice now. The actual last statement that Jesus makes before his prayer, because the prayer in chapter 17 is between him and the Father. He's speaking in a way that the others can hear, but he's talking to the Father in John 17. So therefore, the end of 16 must be one of the last things, perhaps, that he says to his disciples, at least that we have, that was recorded by John. So John 16:33, watch what it says. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. But we see that it is on record that we will have tribulation on this earth. This world wasn't designed, well, back in the beginning, in the garden, it was all fine and good, but now the world is such that there will be tribulation. Jesus, he tells his disciples here, and then of course through that trickle effect, it also affects us. Be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. I don't know if you noticed, the whole point of the lesson is that we don't walk alone. That's the whole point. You don't walk alone. You start walking alone. You start going rogue. You ain't gonna make it. Start slipping on stones, falling in ditches, all kinds of stuff. Can't walk alone. Now, we find even Jesus telling us in verse 32, behold, the hour comes, yea, is now come. You will be scattered, every man to his own, and shall leave me alone. So mankind scattered, and Jesus was left alone. I just made the statement. You can't make it if you walk alone, didn't I? You can't make it if you walk alone. And Jesus said that he's going to be left alone. But then even the Christ, even the Son, even the Messiah, even Jesus then says, and yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. And therefore, we have the lesson. How is it that you overcome the world and the lusts thereof? By walking with God. Walk with him. Stay with him. Sometimes you got to walk forward to immerse yourself in the Christ. Then your prayer is your walk. Your behavior is your walk. The things you do, your thoughts, your intents, it's all a part of your walk. Keep it in the light as he is in the light. And if you have found yourself living in that lie, and I told you that was that little flavor, that little piece that I wanted to focus in on today. You cannot walk in darkness and also be in fellowship with the Father. John said you can't do it, it's impossible. So get yourself set on that course with Jesus. And walk with him.